Hello, welcome back to the fourth lesson of Radio 2. I hope you had a wonderful weekend and you listened to some good radio. If there was any big stories that you read about or that you listened to on the radio, by all means, drop me an email, let me know. Perhaps it's something we can speak about. So what we'll be looking at today in detail is pretty much, in essence, qualitative research versus quantitative research. Qualitative data is a type of data that describes information, so the quality. Quantitative data is something that's able to be measured, so the quantity, so numbers. Okay. Qualitative research is focus groups. Quantitative research, large sample procedures. In other words, you have 28 people at your radio station and you already know half of their opinions anyway. So you get 12 people who really like your format gathered in a room. Then you ask them in great depth and detail about whatever you need to discover. These 12 people are a flashlight in the dark for you. They will illuminate new areas and point you in the correct direction that you need to go for a larger or quantitative study. So if you start with a qualitative study, you'll start with these 12 people in a room, getting their opinions, their views on the different aspects of your radio station. After that, you'll then have more of a direction, more of a clear direction in which to go for your quantitative study. This group that you've just had is like gold. They can teach you things you never believed possible about your station, and the deeper you go, the better it gets. The one thing you should keep in mind is you shouldn't make big radio decisions, station decisions, based on this qualitative focus group. That calls for a bigger quantitative study. There are some researchers who say you should never base your programming decisions on qualitative research, and all agree that unless designed to do so, results from qualitative research should not be the sole factor in any decision making. So qualitative research is an approach to research that allows the researcher to study the participants' experiences with reference to a particular framework. This means that people selected to participate in the study explain their personal experience of questions asked to them. This data is then collected in textual or verbal, not numerical form. In other words, qualitative research is about words and meanings, not numbers. So when we do this kind of research, a qualitative research, we're interested in what the focus group thinks or feels about a certain topic. Whether I'm interested in the breakfast show, whether I like the breakfast show, whether I like the presenters, how I feel about the music. Is it my type of music? Isn't it? Would you tune in tomorrow to listen to the same presenters once again? So qualitative studies normally involve 10 to 12 people and are used to collect indicators that will then be tested, as we mentioned earlier, in a more statistically reliable research project, for example, a phone study. Okay, so we do this, we get the thoughts and the feelings and everything first, then it's combined. It gives me an idea in which direction I'll go next, which is my quantitative research. And then I take what I have and I go put numbers to it. In other words, the questions based on the insights gained in the qualitative study can lead you in the direction of seeking trends in the quantitative study. So there are two ways in which information is revealed. There's explicit and then there's implicit. So explicit is where a person must understand a question and reply with a particular answer in a conscious and thoughtful way. Implicit, on the other hand, is where through certain techniques, a researcher can access subconscious levels of thought that a respondent has, but might not be able to explain or access. Looking at these two ways that information is revealed, there are then a few methods that we can use to access the information. Those methods are word association, projective technique, visualization, and laddering. So if we start with word association, what does that tell you when you listen to it? This is where the researcher reads a list of words to the respondents, and then the respondent will write down or say the first word that comes to mind as they hear them, each item on the list. I'm sure you've played this game many times with friends before when you were smaller, where one would say a word and then someone else would say what comes to mind immediately when they think of that word, etc. So this list often includes brand names, products, and activities. Word association helps the researcher identify what types of feelings and thoughts the respondents have about a particular brand. So for instance, if we ask, what does the name YFM mean to you? You might answer something like young, urban, Joburg, which would then help the management team of YFM determine whether those are in fact true associations to their brand or whether there's something that needs to be adapted. If we look at the next one, projective technique, again, think about it. What do you think projective technique is? Projective technique is where the researcher provides an image or a scenario that the respondent needs to complete or make sense of. The respondent must predict what might happen next in a scenario. So for instance, someone gets in their car, they close the door, and they start the car. This is where you as the respondent will then fill in the blanks or tell the rest of the story. So most probably the guy would drive away, is what I would think would happen next. But they might say that the person might put on his seatbelt first before driving, or he'll put on the radio, or he'll put on the aircon, or check his mirror, etc. An example here would be, so a researcher might ask, if Metro FM was a person, who would they be? And then the respondent might answer DJ Fresh, for back in the day, or Nelson Mandela. So the idea here is these associations can provide insight into the perceived personality that a brand has. The next one we're looking at is visualization. Visualization is a very popular form of implicit testing that reveals a lot about the person's subconscious decision-making and the motivation for making certain choices. If we look at the example in the textbook, in this case, the respondent are asked to create a collage from images they can find in magazines to show how they feel about something. If I ask a group of you to create a collage that shows how you feel about a particular radio station, you would literally go into a magazine and cut out a couple of things. So it might be anything from humorous to trendy. You might cut out certain celebs that you would put on there, that kind of thing. What then happens is the researcher will then conduct a one-on-one interview with you to have a discussion around this collage that you made. If we look at the last method, laddering. What do you think about when I say laddering in qualitative research? Laddering works by asking a couple of why questions in succession in order to get to the root of why a respondent likes or dislikes a certain product. An example would be, why do you listen to 5FM? I like the music. Why do you like the music? They play a lot of new stuff I haven't heard before. Why do you like to hear new stuff you haven't heard before? I like to know what's fresh and new on the scene. Why do you want to know what's fresh and new on the music scene? My friends and I like to talk about music and go to events where new music is played. So the end result here would then be that 5FM's brand essence of keeping its listeners at the front with new music as it comes out is understood by the consumers. So as a listener, I picked that up, that is one of the things that they focus on. So obviously, authenticity is extremely important when it comes to this type of research. There are 8 points that qualitative researchers should take into consideration to make sure that their research is authentic. So in summary, word association is when the researcher reads a list of words to the respondents who then write them down or say the first word that comes to mind as they hear each item on the list. Projective technique. This is where the researcher provides an image or a scenario that the respondent needs to complete or make sense of. Visualization. This is a very popular form of implicit testing that reveals a lot about a person's subconscious decision-making and the motivation for making certain choices. Lastly, laddering. This involves successive why questioning in order to get to the root of the respondent's likes or dislikes to a certain product. I'm sure you'd like to do one of those why questionings yourself. I think it could be quite fun. If you look at Next Level Radio on page 432 at the bottom, there are 8 points that qualitative researchers should consider in order to achieve authenticity in their research. The first one is the worthiness of topic. So this relates to the level of contribution that the topic has to answering the question that is being asked by the research. Number 2, rich rigor in terms of the kinds and diversity of the respondents. So this concept is about ensuring that the respondents that have been selected for the research provide sufficient diversity and different types of experiences and inputs that will add value to the questions being asked. The third one, sincerity in terms of transparency and reflexivity of the study. So how good is the study at continued questioning throughout the research process? Is it clear about addressing potential pitfalls? Number 4, credibility in terms of the thick description. So thick description is about capturing a full and colorful picture of each respondent and their situation. This process should not reduce the respondents to demographics, but describe them in detail. Number 5, resonance in terms of the effect of the researcher on the reader. So quality, authentic research delivers a change in the thinking or information of the consumers. Quality, authentic research delivers a change in the thinking and or information that the consumers of the research did not already have. It should contribute to a change in the thinking and potentially a change of behavior. Number 6, significant contribution to theory and practice. This concept is about ensuring that a scientific method is followed without any subjectivity or bias. Number 7, ethical considerations. So qualitative research can become quite personal by its very nature. In order to attribute authenticity to a qualitative study, an ethical approach to the study must be maintained throughout. Otherwise, it could put the respondent in quite a tricky or dangerous situation. Let's say, for instance, someone volunteered a piece of information about their health that is not needed for the study. It shouldn't be included and documented in the outcome of the study. For example, perhaps I have a certain disease and I take weed because I believe weed will help me with this disease. And I mentioned this in the study as a by the by. This isn't something that should be included at the end of the day because that now poses a risk to my career, my relationships, my living situation, etc. Okay, that brings us to quantitative research. So we have now done the feeling side of it, getting all of that information together. Now we're moving on to the numbers, the second part of research. So quantitative research is a large sample procedure which yields quantitative results. For example, format searches or perceptual telephone studies. These can be generalized to the population from which the sample was selected. So quantitative research gathers numerical information about the relationship between research variables and analyzes it using statistics, so stats. So in a nutshell, quantitative research is gathered by turning data obtained from respondents, so from the qualitative data, into numbers and then measuring various trends from these numbers. The most common one for us would be BRC RAM. This is an example of a quantitative method of research. The reason for this is that questions posed to the respondent will generate results that can be transferred into numbers. For instance, how many radio stations do you listen to? What is your favorite radio station? Obviously, then there's things to be counted. These numbers can then all be drawn together in order to understand bigger questions. For instance, what are the most common devices that the average South African listens radio to on? So on page 434 of Next Level Radio, there's a very interesting section about technology and consumer neuroscience that helped researchers to understand consumers' reactions to various stimuli. But we're not going to go through that now. Go read it. It's really interesting. You might learn something about your brain. So when we look at research, there are two things that are extremely important, and that is that the research needs to be valid and reliable. Okay? So the research needs to be valid and reliable for us to be able to use it. So how do we ensure that the study being conducted, the research coming out of it, is both valid and reliable? So what we do is we use what is called multivariate, measuring more than one variable method, so that the influence of any external factors will be accounted for. This will then reinforce the reliability and the validity of research. So what is it? So validity is about the accuracy of the study. The ideal research situation should have a valid test or study that is also reliable. So the test should be valuable and reliable. It is possible to have a valid test that is unreliable or an invalid test that is reliable. If we think about an example here of a valid test which is unreliable, so let's quickly do an example of a study that was a valid test which was unreliable. So I'm a program manager of a radio station, and I want to know whether people listen to my breakfast presenter. So what I do is I put together a study with a couple of his friends and a couple of his biggest fans to find out whether they listen to him. So I have everything else in place. I made sure they're not influenced by one another. I made sure that the demos were properly sampled. So in essence, I've done everything right. So I have a valid test, but the study is unreliable. Why? Because the sample is still a group of the presenter's friends and biggest fans. So if you really want to know whether your community likes your breakfast presenter, don't recruit his biggest fans or his friends. Remember, know your market. Work with your researcher to ensure validity. Proving that a study is valid involves ensuring that the methodology accounts for any factors that might influence the results. When we try to prove validity, there are two challenges that we have to address. These are, what type of measurement mechanism can we put into place? And then, can we generalize the findings of the research outside of the respondents who participated in the study setting provided? The measurement mechanism is about making a study credible. So in essence, was the study carried out by using principles of good practice? This can involve getting the respondents to review what the researcher has captured and making sure that they are happy with the findings and that they can confirm that the researcher has understood their responses adequately. This is particularly the case of qualitative research. So in a simple way, this process is like fact-checking. And then the second question, can we generalize the findings of the research outside of the respondents who participated in the study setting provided? So in essence, what this is saying is, what would happen if I take a different group and I put them in a different setting? What kind of results will I yield? So factors such as where the study is conducted can have an impact on the questions answered. Let's say, for instance, I am in a laboratory room with one light bulb hanging down over me, so dimly lit room, not a lot of windows. So I'm already feeling very intimidated, just purely by my setting. This might lead me to answer questions untruthfully, where I might have answered it truthfully in a setting where I felt completely comfortable. Or what can happen is that they could be under some kind of research prejudice, where they feel that there are correct answers to the questions being asked. They might say they earn more than they do, so you might ask me what my salary is, and I'll go, oh, it's 3 times the amount that it actually is, purely because I think that's the answer that you want to hear. So that is validity in a nutshell. So as we just mentioned, there's something called prestige bias, and then there's something called research bias. So prestige bias, respondents here would tend to give answers that they think will make them seem more educated, more successful, hip, financially stable, etc. You might ask a respondent what position they're in, and they might say they're the CEO of a company where they actually don't have a position at all, or they might say they have a degree where they actually only have a trick. So yes, respondents tend to give answers that they think will make them seem better, in essence. Research bias, on the other hand, respondents give the answers that they think the researcher wants to hear. So here they want to impress you, they want to please the researcher, they want to give the correct answers. So again, here there's a lot of bias involved in the end product. Luckily, with these kind of things, with both prestige bias and researcher bias, this is quite easily managed and picked up by a skilled professional. So that's validity. If we look at reliability, reliability seeks to determine how easy it is to replicate the results of the study. if I took the same research study and I did it with a different group of people, different group of respondents, using the same sampling method though. So I'm not changing my sampling method, just changing the people. Would the results of the study be similar? Technically, they should. So reliability is about offering consistent results with repeated applications, okay? So validity is about the accuracy of the study, and then reliability is about seeing how easy it is to replicate the results of the study. So that's the difference between those two. In summary, why research if you're not prepared to make any changes? If I'm the program manager and I like my morning presenter, I don't want to get rid of them. Why would I do the research that might give me those type of results? Okay. Qualitative research, focus groups. Quality, it's about the quality, how you feel about things. Quantitative research, large sample procedures. It's about the numbers. So you do the feeling thing first, then you take that over into the numbers, and then you get your results. The validity of your research. A test or a study should measure what it is intended to measure. Make sure your research data and findings are reliable. Context is extremely important. Choose your sample set in a non-biased manner. The two types of biases, prestige bias versus researcher bias. Ask the right questions directly and don't record the answers you only want to hear. If we look at random sampling, every person has an equal chance of being selected to participate in a focus group, a music test, or a telephone perceptual study. A radio station database is not a random sample. Someone volunteering for your study has also not been chosen randomly. Then size is important. To all aimed demographic sets, choose at least 75 respondents of each of your sample set. If I want to know how many adults there are between 25 and 44, what do I need to do? I need to look at women aged between the ages of 25 to 34. I'd need to look at men between the ages of 25 to 34. Then I'd need to look at women aged from 35 to 44 and men from 35 to 44. How many people do I need? I need 75 respondents in each of these 4 categories. So that brings me to a total number of 300 people, which would be considered adequate for this kind of study. Okay, so now we've said all these things about qualitative and quantitative data and how we would use them for research. But how would we actually use a focus group? As a focus group is such a small sample at a time. I mean, it's 10 to 12 people that we use. This small sample technique will give an indicator and it'll help you devise the next set of questions you will need for your larger group, whether it's for a telephone or for an internet perceptual study, whatever it's for, now at least you have the starting point. The internet is a very valuable tool also to use for group research. Collecting data from willing users to your station site can be useful to learn who's responding to your station's programming or to your ads or whatever else it is that's going on the station. This data you can then use to further understand your audience. So it's very important to always take a look at your metrics. So who is visiting your station? Who is visiting your website? So these are active listeners of yours, and they can be quite valuable to be used as a focus group, as an online focus group. Through questions that probe listeners' knowledge and impressions, you can get a feel whether people perceive your station's programming the way that you'd want them to. So it's important to ask the same question in a number of different ways to see whether the answer changes or stays the same. So for example, during a perceptual study, you might ask something like, which station plays the best hip hop? Which station plays the best variety of hip hop? Which station plays the hottest new hip hop songs? Which station plays your favorite hip hop tunes? This is then where a skilled researcher would come in and they would be able to interpret the differences in the responses that you give and give you a more in-depth answer at the end of the day. So how do I use a focus group after all of this? Remember that a focus group data findings are used as an indicator. So major decisions should not be based on your findings. Find out information about your listeners' knowledge and impression about your radio station. Try to get an indication of whether the station is on the correct track. Find out about your competitors by including people who don't listen to your station, and it never hurts to bring in people who work for you too. Remember the portable people meter, so the electronic device that offers immediate, up-to-date or up-to-minute results 24 hours a day. And in closing, don't forget about the RAM diaries. So I want you to think about both of them in your head. What do you think they are? Do you think they are qualitative or quantitative, and why? What is the difference, again, between qualitative and quantitative? So qualitative, small focus groups, 10 to 12 people in a group. Quantitative research, large sample procedures. Qualitative research studies a participant's experiences. So looking at words and meanings instead of numbers. Quantitative research is a large sample procedure which yields quantitative results. So if we look at format searches, or remember those perceptual telephone studies. Quantitative research, remember also, is gathered by turning data obtained from respondents into numbers, then measuring various trends from these numbers. So I think if we look at BRC RAMs, the RAM diary should be quite easy. I think it's quite obvious that RAM diaries fall under quantitative research. But what do you think about PPM, the portable people meter? Would that be quantitative or qualitative? So PPM would also fall under quantitative, because at the end of the day, it's also a large sample group with numbers that we are compiling to put into data to be able to give the radio stations their listenership figures. It is important to note, though, that so they've actually looked at the PPM panelists, not just in terms of the radio stations that they would listen to, but also the way that they'd interact with the meters themselves. So what they think of it, how they use it, how do all those variables related to the PPM meter impact the ratings that our radio stations achieve. So a qualitative study has been done on it, but overall, it's just purely normal quantitative studies. Okay, so if we go back here, I just gave you the answers for both of these. Both of them are quantitative research methodologies. Okay, so you need to understand why it is that they are, like we just broke it down into pieces. Homework, yes, it is that time again. If you go to your next level radio textbook and you look at page 437, example 11B there is how to set up a questionnaire. Please go through this in detail. This is something we would have done in the class if we were together. Unfortunately, we're not, but I still need you to do this. It's still something you need to know. And then if you scroll to page 444, so 444, please complete activity 11C for me. Okay, question 1, 2, and 3. You'll see it's quite easy. By now, you'd have the knowledge to be able to answer this. So question 1 is, in your own words, explain the difference between quantitative and qualitative research methods. Provide an example of each of these methods in the radio environment. Number 2, explain the concepts of validity and reliability, which you spoke about earlier, in the research context. Discuss why these concepts are important in the field of research. Lastly, select your favorite radio station in South Africa and think of the brand attributes you associate with the station. Using these attributes, draw up a composite listener reference profile for the station, considering their programming and brand activity. Okay, what you need to do with that is you need to mail it through to me when you're done with that, please. So that is it for this lesson. I'll see you again on your next one. Okay, so now I want us to look at RAMs and PPM. In our previous classes, we've discussed both RAMs and RAMs diaries in detail, as well as PPM, portable people meters, we've also discussed. So you should have a very clear understanding of both of these. So looking at both of them, Do you think that RAM and PPM are qualitative or quantitative research methodologies, and why? Or would you think the one is on the one side and the one is on the other side?